coming up on this episode of the Roundtable.
So Trump responded to all of this and said, well, this is a hoax. This is a lie. He's like, I don't know this woman. I never met her. It's a hoax. It's a scam.
Okay.
And so then she filed another suit against him for defamation.
What?
So there's currently two suits. One is for sexual assault.
Yeah.
And this is a civil case. And the other is for defamation because he said she was a liar. Now, that just seems like the most bizarre thing. So you're not allowed to rebuke or contest somebody's claim because to do so would then defame her as a liar. I just think that that's like the most twisted and bizarre aspect of this whole thing.
Hello and welcome once again to the Roundtable, your weekly publishers and editors podcast here at the American Mind. It's another Klavan and Barron episode today. My grandfather had a radio show called Klavan and Finch, and whenever Seth and I do these one-on-one shows, I feel like we should have a special sub-segment title of Klavan and Barron. Lots to talk about, as usual, it seems, these days. And top line item, I'm sure for all of our listeners, as well as for us, is to talk about the departure of Tucker Carlson from Fox News and a whole cloud of associated issues related to that. So on Monday, it was announced that Tucker would be leaving Fox. It does not look as if, from the outside information, it does not look as if he had a lot of leeway or advance warning about this. His show on Friday included statements like, see you on Monday. And there seemed to have been like a whole bunch of shows scheduled and planned, but he was let go, so far as I can tell. I should say, as will be clear from what I've already said, I have no inside information about any of this. There's a lot of unfolding drama that will be coming down the pike. This is a developing story. There's, I think, a ton of stuff that we don't know, probably more stuff we don't know about this than we do. But obviously it's made big waves among those that, pay attention to these sorts of things. Tucker was Fox's highest rated personality, highest rated host. Really, I think, distinctive at their network in that there were people that were only watching for Tucker. He was hypercritical of certain conservative orthodoxies that otherwise get a lot of love over on Fox, more of a populist kind of voice, critical of the Ukraine. Of America's involvement in the Ukraine war, and involved, consequentially, this will matter for what we talk about, involved also in investigating, discussing a lot of the election interference stuff that unfolded after 2020. So he's now gone. There's a lot that we don't know, as I said, about where he plans to go, what's going to happen next. Among those that really were devoted fans of his, this is seems to be a huge blow. I should say, from my perspective, like the kind of curtain has definitely not fallen. I'm not sure where he'll end up, but I'm sure he will continue to be an important voice. But the relationship between this event and a bunch of other events is also sort of in question. I'm sure we'll talk about it. One thing that also happened on Monday is that Don Lemon at CNN was fired. And that has been held up as some kind of like lefty counterpart to this right wing unfolding. I mean, it doesn't really hold up, only in that Lemon is sort of a reviled figure and Tucker is pretty beloved. So I imagine Tucker will have his own very successful enterprise, whereas who knows if anybody will ever listen to Don Lemon again. But it's kind of an interesting parallelism and raises questions about how much of this had been planned in advance, especially since the other thing that happened is Fox paid out a bunch of money in a settlement, almost $800 million in a settlement with Dominion, the voting machine company, in a defamation case. And Tucker was involved in that. He was quoted in the discovery of that case. So there's also been, questions about whether that was a proximate cause or a catalyst or what have you. But I don't know, Seth, where to begin here? What would you say are the most sort of salient features of this as it currently stands? Obviously, lots that we're going to find out in days to come, but this is it's a sort of a big moment in the lead up to 2024. No.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, when I first heard about all of this, I sort of read it as like, because I seem to remember hearing that Susan Rice, on the same day,
Right.
news came out that Susan Rice would be stepping out of her role as the domestic policy coordinator in the Biden White House. So to me, it kind of felt like a general house cleaning,
Yeah.
in preparation for 2024. Everybody wants to get their team straight, maybe clean out what they see as dead wood, or like, get their mission straight, get their messaging straight. I mean, the thing about Tucker, he always seemed a little sui generis, even on Fox. I mean, his point of view. I mean, that was one of the interesting things, is the left would always complain that Fox News is this like,
Hmm.
organ of just militant racism and this unquestioned fealty to Trump and to whatever this conservative line was. But in reality, especially with Tucker on, they provided a much broader
Oh, yeah.
range of opinion than you would find on any other channel. I mean, he gave a platform to people who were basically hard left. I mean, people who like Glenn Greenwald or
Yeah.
Jimmy Dore, like people you would expect to find on like Pacifica, or really, you know lefty outlets who no longer can find a place. His criticism of, I mean, he was savage about Mitch McConnell, just like brutal. So there were so many ways in which he didn't really fit the Fox News conservative brand per se. Also, if you would watch the advertising, he had no national advertisers.
Right.
Like all of his, because there was such a huge pressure campaign from like AOC and people like that to try to get him off the air. So you would watch Fox News, and whoever came on before and after would have Lincoln or whatever major national brands, but Tucker would just have either ads for other Fox shows, My Pillow,
Yeah.
or like dubious supplements, or you know gold, ways to store your gold. So there was always, it always felt like there was something that didn't quite mesh. And have he would have segments on UFOs, or the Kennedy assassination and how the CIA killed Kennedy.
Specials like manliness and the decline in testosterone and
Yeah, right.
that's yeah. There was a lot
So
of yeah.
I mean, that's why it kind of seems like, you know, I mean, Tucker is certainly going to have he'll figure out his own platform going forward. I'm not worried about that. And, as far as the coincidence with Don Lemon or Don Lemon, as Tucker would call him,
Yeah.
being fired at the same time, I mean, that guy just seemed like, I could never figure out why he was on CNN. I mean, it almost felt like he was there just to annoy people, annoy the enemy. But yeah, to me, it feels like some kind of general house cleaning. Like, let's get everything straight for 2024 when we want to have a lot of message discipline going forward. Something like that.
That seems right to me. I mean, the thing about having kind of a wider remit than most other hosts, not just on Fox, but most other networks have a point of view and they cleave to it pretty rigorously. In fact, very much to a fault. So for me, at least, there are people out there talking as if this is like the martyrdom of some, freedom fighter who was imprisoned in China for speaking out against the regime or something. And I don't want to oversell the significance of, what went on at Fox, but I do think that one aspect of what you're describing, Seth, with his programming is that this was the only person that I can think of on Fox or on cable news generally who was actually working out a point of view, like trying to suss out a philosophy rather than toe some party line or recycle some talking points. And there is a lot, I think, to the argument that that's something that the system, capital S, simply could not abide. That it was actually his, just whether you agreed with him or not, it was his sort of maverick attention to kind of taking no prisoners, to exploring genuine, like kooky, unorthodox avenues of thought, because he recognized the gravity of some of our national crises. I mean, one thing that's been floating around the kind of cloud of associations after this whole thing got announced was this speech he made, I guess, right before
Right.
the weekend at Heritage, which, where, first of all, he sounds like he's been listening to a lot of the things we say on this podcast. So, Tucker, come on the pod, like talking about a lot of stuff we talk about, like the only way that you can address the situation in America is with like spiritual language, spiritual effort. He says, amusingly in his inimitable way, he's like, look, I'm an Episcopalian. It's the worst faith tradition ever. But even I feel like you need to be praying like 10 minutes a day. And man, it's an electrifying speech. He did a beautiful job. And this was always, I think, his greatest strength was his ability to kind of speak in those plain terms about to take seriously the seriousness of what he's calling people to. Because the other thing is that there is this brand of media, of cable news media, where it's like the world is falling apart, like more at 11. And now, whereas Tucker actually seems to feel as if the world is falling apart and we should like take that seriously. And he himself would often say things like, they're going to kind of, they're not going to like live with me for that long. Like the typical kind of button up news service that I'm working with just won't sustain me, can't. And so I suspect that they were looking for a way to get rid of him. I think you're right, Seth, that it's because all the other stuff aside, Dominion, whatever, like it's actually because he was kind of uncontrollable in the way that somebody that's genuinely trying to tell the truth is uncontrollable. That's very admirable, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, I gather his speech at Heritage, I mean, he was pretty red blooded and saying, like, look, the left is godless and they hate America. And we just need to recognize that and stop trying to argue with them because they're not interested in having an argument. They're strictly interested in power and winning. No, I mean,
Child sacrifice, another one. Yeah, right.
yeah, and Tucker, I think, understood what the stakes are, and I mean, he was always whatever. He definitely was in concert with a lot of the stuff that we think and we say, and I'll miss his show, but I'm pretty sure that we're going to hear plenty from Tucker Carlson going forward. So I don't see any of this as like a reason to mourn at all.
No, I think it was kind of inevitable. It was bound to happen. You're right that the timing of it is coincident with the time when like a lot of these sorts of things occur. The part of it that's genuinely concerning to me actually is more to do with like the structural implications of things like the Dominion lawsuit, where like, I was reading the discovery from that defamation case that they brought against. It wasn't just against Tucker, it was against a bunch of people, but it was the main accusation was not that Tucker or anybody else had said anything untrue, but that they had people on, like Sidney Powell and Rudy Giuliani, who had said untrue things, and they had done like insufficient debunking, which to me, I don't know, I'm no legal expert, but that just seems like a bonkers standard, especially if you want to err on the side of protecting freedom of the press. You had a piece about this in Unheard that like it just seems as if there's now kind of open season on people that even entertain ideas which don't, which have already been predetermined as lies. It's like if what you're trying to figure out is whether they are lies, then this is kind of a bad lawsuit. And the implication that then you'll get, that you can't explore those sorts of things without costing your network almost $1 billion, like a fourth of its money or something, then that's kind of bad. That seems really rough.
Oh, absolutely. And I guess, I mean, who knows if with the timing of the five, if they're using the Dominion case as like a pretext to get rid of Tucker or making him the fall guy for it, even though there were other people on the network who also amplified the story of Dominion. I mean, what I found interesting about the Dominion thing is, and I've brought this up countless times on this podcast, but ever since Trump became president, it's become normal for mainstream media outlets like the New York Times or the Washington Post or CNN, whatever, to say Trump's lies about so and so, or Trump lied today, and in a way that never used to be considered normal. It used to be that the role of the media was to report what a politician said and then maybe provide some context and provide report it.
Right.
And if you felt that it was a lie, they might say he alleged or he averred or whatever, right? There's all kinds of words you can use. But saying that someone lied about making a claim just seems bizarre because in the context of reportage, I took a look at the Washington Post database because they have this database that they're very proud of that has 40,000 instances of Trump's lies. And it includes things like on such and such a date, Trump said that Melania was the best first lady in history and the most popular. And they're like, this is a lie. In fact, Melania Trump is not even ranked among the top 10 first ladies by so and so, an expert on first ladies. Trump said that his campaign was the best. I mean, just things that are clearly just a matter of opinion or typical the way political, elected people bluster or say things. These are all lies. And what I always come back to regarding the Dominion thing, in 2004, even before the election, there was a huge flurry of news about Diebold voting systems,
Right.
and Ohio and how questionable it was. And for years, even up till now, people are still talking about how Kerry really won Ohio. And the whole thing was stolen by Diebold, which had some, dubious, tenuous connections to Republican operatives or some supposedly. So that's talked about, but they still write about it. You can look it up, but nobody says that this is a lie or that it's somehow a criminal allegation.
Right.
Hillary Clinton in 2016 warned about how the election could be stolen by hacking into voting machines and that we need to be really careful. So, and she still maintains that 2016 was stolen. In fact, they were just saying that on CNN, they had some expert talking about how Trump stole the election by bribing or, being blackmailed by Stormy Daniels and that this stole the election. Well, why isn't that a lie?
Yeah, I mean, there's an important reason why they keep those lists. And it's not because they genuinely think that a guy like going overboard of saying nice things about his wife amounts to treason or perjury or whatever. Like,
Right.
That's not why they do it. It's for the purposes of information overwhelm. It's so that they can then write articles where they link to the list, and then that link amounts to the full extent of their justification for an assertion like, Trump, the most dishonest president in history or whatever. And it's like, who's going to click the link and go through all the things? And, only us, like guys like you and me who are like obsessed over all this stuff and, get paid to look at it all the time. Your average reader is just going to now live in this cloud of associations where, yeah, like Trump colluded with Russia and he's a liar and Trump lies. And if you don't say that, then like you can't even have his lawyers on your show without kind of buttressing them about, cushioning them in all of these disclaimers. And I don't know. I mean, I'm looking at this discovery from this case and I'm thinking like, it's clear they were in a difficult position, as a lot of people were in that time, where it was like they wanted to do due diligence and investigate this claim that was being made in a very major way. A lot of them thought there wasn't a lot to it, and so they were like texting back and forth about how they thought there wasn't a lot to it. Like whatever. I'm less concerned about that and more concerned, as you raised in your piece, about like the front page New York Magazine assertion that Donald Trump, I'm quoting you here, that Donald Trump had been recruited as a KGB mole in the 1980s. And that stuff just kind of enters into the record of established fact. So yeah, I guess I feel, I mean, that part of it, which has been going on forever and which is not a surprise to any of us, is pretty grim. And like AOC, like the ghoul that she is, going on social media and saying like, deplatforming works. It's like, no, duh. Like you're basically coming out and saying what you want to do, which is to make it impossible to argue against you. And this kind of stuff is incredibly sinister. It's also sort of baked into the cake. I saw Cernovich kind of speculating that maybe this has to do with like a push on Ukraine because Tucker's like a big Ukraine skeptic, whatever. All of that could be. Structurally, the problem though is like I think much more severe and much more dire. Because you're right, like Tucker is gonna land on his feet, and this is not the end of him. And in fact, like it might be the end. It's closer to being the end of Fox than to being the end of Tucker, I would suspect. But we shall see. Much remains to be unveiled. Seth, you mentioned to me that you've got something to tell me about about the Trump rape case, and this is something that I'm embarrassed to say I know almost nothing about. So I thought rather than having you tell me over the phone, I would just have you tell me on the air, because I'm very interested to know what's going on.
Oh, okay. Well, the Trump's trial started this week in Manhattan, and this is a really weird case. Okay, so E. Jean Carroll, who is she's a writer, magazine writer. She was an advice columnist. She alleged in 2019 that she had been raped by Trump in the middle of Bergdorf Goodman, which is, a very Tony, very high-end department store on Fifth Avenue, right, pretty close to Trump Tower, that she had been raped by him in the 90s, in the mid-90s. She wasn't sure. Even now, she doesn't know if it was 1994, 95, or 96. She doesn't remember what time of year it was either.
She didn't mark it calendar. That's funny.
Yes. Although she claims to have told some people about it. Now, everything about this case is really weird. Okay, so she brought this up in 2019, and at the time she said, well, I'm not going to. They said, well, do you want to pursue criminal charges? And she said, no, I won't, because I won't do it out of respect for all the women who are being raped around the clock on the southern border, who have no. Yeah, she said that on television to Olbermann, I believe. And this was during the whole, kids in cages, family separation thing, where everyone was claiming that Trump had, was committing just all this like horrible activity. So yes, so because women were being raped around the clock, she would not pursue a case. But then here's the best part. So Trump responded to all of this and said, well, this is a hoax. This is a lie. He's like, I don't know this woman. I never met her. It's a hoax. It's a scam.
Okay.
And so then she filed another suit against him for defamation.
What?
So there's currently two suits. One is for sexual assault.
Yeah.
And this is a civil case. And the other is for defamation because he said she was a liar. Now that just seems like the most bizarre thing. So you're not allowed to rebuke or contest somebody's claim that you raped them, because to do so would then defame her as a liar. I just think that that's like the most twisted and bizarre aspect of this whole thing.
It's kind of a perfect little encapsulation of the dynamic that we were just talking about with defamation generally and with like freedom of the press, right? It's like they can say absolutely anything that they want about Trump.
Yes.
to defend Trump or to have Trump's people on your show is like tantamount to insurrection, essentially, and you'll be
exactly. Then he claimed that he had never met her, but they dug up like an old photo from the early '90s where
Right.
he and she are in the same frame, basically, and they're like, well, there's another example of how he lied. And then, look, her lawyer is this woman, Roberta Kaplan, who's like a big gay rights attorney. She did the Edie Windsor case, but her wife is a big shot in the New York State Democratic Party, and they got a law passed through the legislature giving a 1-year window through which victims could sue anyone who they claimed had sexually abused them. The entire case, the entire law was set up just to facilitate a lawsuit against Trump.
Right.
Openly. They said that that's why they were doing it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's practically like a bill of attainder. I don't know. The whole case just seems so weird and questionable. And just the fact that I just can't get over the idea that you could be sued for defamation for denying a charge against you. That's basically all I wanted to.
It's like you said your wife is hot and everybody loves her, and therefore you've perjured yourself, and also you've defended yourself against a rape charge, and therefore you're defaming.
You're a libelist or whatever.
Yeah, you're a lying, defaming, whatever. I mean,
right.
The thing that it is, I mean, it's this weird backwards thinking that we've talked about before on the pod, where it's like Trump is evil. He's like, in fact, by definition, he's evil. Like Trump and evil is synonymous words. Trump and fascism are synonymous words. Trump's actions are definitive of what it is to do wrong and to offend and to assault the republic. And therefore, it must be the case that there exists some legal avenue to imprisoning him and rendering him impotent. Right. It follows as night from day that because what he is doing is defined as illegal, therefore the law has some means of destroying him. And so they then just invent like a million different ways that the law can be kind of remade in the image of Trump as the kind of lodestone, North Star, touchstone of what is bad, which is like,
well, it's like that line from like Lavrentiy Beria.
Yeah.
The head of the UGPU under or the KGB under Stalin, show me the man and I'll find the crime.
Yeah.
So basically, from the perspective of like the New York State Attorney General and all these people who I've been following, their entire attitude is like, look, just how you described it. His criminality is so manifest that if we can't convict him, then there's clearly a problem with the law. And we need to tweak the law in order to, get him in prison where he belongs.
And that's why they make the bogus list of his lies. Like, that's kind of what I was trying to say earlier. Is like that whole architecture, that whole like substructure of just BS garbage gunk that doesn't have any, like, totally flimsy, totally invented. But it's there to kind of underwrite your sense that, well, Trump must be guilty because he's Trump. Like, he's the bad guy. He's got all the bad stuff attached to him. Every bad word kind of like belongs to him. And in fact, his picture is in the dictionary next to all those bad words. And so, like, the whole legal system has to basically be restructured according to the orientation of like Trump is the thing that is illegal.
And the funny thing about Trump, and let me just end with this, it's like, before he ran for, even when he was running for president, but before he ran for president, like nobody hated Trump, right? I mean, people like
Home Alone 2 or whatever.
He was just kind of like, he was like considered like a loudmouth, like kind of a buffoon. I mean, I never particularly liked Trump.
Right.
Like growing up, my grandfather, they lived in like Trump Village, which was like sort of middle income sort of housing out in like Coney Island.
Yeah.
And they just hated Trump. But they hated his, but he was just seen as like a blowhard, right? I had no interest in him at all until he came out with this like stunning political program. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I like it. Now I'm a Trump fan, and it's strictly because of the issues. That's what people don't get, is that Trump was like he had an issues based campaign, and that's why people liked him. If he had just said the usual stuff, the usual Republican Party, mealy mouth stuff, he wouldn't have gotten any votes. But whatever. But that's my take on this case. It's the whole thing is very typical of the whole.
It's a great little like microcosm, this representation of and like just to sort of square the circle or whatever you call it, just to close the circle. One other part of the Dominion case that was really interesting to me was that, and Chris Caldwell points this out in his piece about it in Compact, is that Fox was not allowed to argue, even to make the argument that they were having these people on, Sidney Powell, Rudy Giuliani, because they were newsworthy, which is one of the core, as I understand it, one of the core concepts in sort of, press protection under free speech is that, okay, so these people are obviously kooks, whatever, but it's unquestionable that they're significant. They were at the time significant individuals in our public discourse. Like the sitting president was making an explosive allegation about the election system, and these were the people who were doing it on his behalf, and they obviously needed attention and airtime, even if it was only so that then you could go turn around and be like, they're wrong or whatever. And nobody else was covering. I mean, and you can make the case that Fox was being too credulous, or that certain, hosts were being too like softball with them, but it was like they were obviously newsworthy. But that whole idea that you at least want to hear the guy out, well, hear what he has to say, that's the thing that is now being sort of delegitimized in Trump's case. Like when it comes to Trump, he doesn't even get to speak. You don't even get to hear from him. And there is a level, I think, on which that is just like when Trump says like, they're after you, I'm just in the way. Like that kind of political delegitimization is kind of what they are after. It's like, no, we can't even hear from you. It will contaminate us. That's not.
Doesn't Trump kind of, doesn't it remind you of like Rene Girard?
Yes. Oh, well, totally. Girard is like in this chat that we're having right now, totally about scapegoating, essentially. Right? Is that what you mean?
Yes, exactly. I mean, he really does kind of figure as like this Christ type
right.
in the Girardian, scheme of the one who draws. I mean, who reveals the mechanism of scapegoating. Right.
I know the left is always accusing us of like deifying Trump or elevating him to the position of Jesus. It's like, no, you're putting him in the role of Jesus, namely the role of like emblematic sufferer on behalf of all sins. Like
exactly. And especially because he's he really is a class traitor. Yes. And right. And there's so many ways in which he just violated all of their precepts. Fascinating.
And in support of that point is your observation that he was not a big deal one way or another before he started standing in for a certain set of ideas. And nobody, even people that found him crass or tasteless or whatever before he started running for president, there were zero people who were like even worried about what might happen if Trump ran for president. Like nobody thought, oh, this is Satan incarnate, until he became kind of the scapegoat. He became the thing that you load everybody's sins onto. Anyway, there's another thing that you raised that I think is a really good idea to talk about, and I don't want us to get too off on this Girardian train before we talk about this adjustment in the mortgage rules that's coming down the pike for anybody buying a house after May 1st, I believe. Check me on this if you're actually buying a house. Don't take financial advice from this podcast. But it does seem as if there is a new fee structure depending on your credit score. And the big kind of top line, the headline item here is that if you have a 740 credit score or higher, you pay a 1% mortgage fee. And if you have a 620 credit score or lower, which kind of gets into the like dicey, risky loan, risky mortgage territory, then you get a 1.75% fee discount. So it's essentially robbing from not even from the rich, because people with good credit scores are not universally rich. It's robbing from the responsible to pay the irresponsible. Like, what gets me about this is, do we never learn? Or, I mean, maybe that's a naive question to ask. I mean, maybe this stuff is by design. It just feels like, is there something more complicated going on here than just they are taking money away from like responsible homeowning Americans to subsidize like people that maybe shouldn't get a loan to buy a house? Like, I don't know. It seems insane to me.
Well, I mean, from what I gather, ever since 1970 or so, or 68, when the Fair Housing Act period, the obsession has been to rectify the racial disparity in home ownership.
Right.
And I don't know a huge amount about this, but it has been written about. And I mean, there's essentially been trillions of dollars poured into trying to make this fit, because allegedly home ownership is the way you create generational wealth in America. Though I don't know if that's actually
generational wealth. Always like calculating when they say things like, Haiti would run the world if it had been allowed, whatever. Like, there's
right.
always making these like compounded calculations that if
Yes,
five generations.
Right. And I mean, this is the same thing that happened in the 20 years ago with the mortgage crisis, and the subprime mortgages, where Bush wanted minorities to own more homes, so they loosened credit standards and mortgage standards and basically gave out all kinds of mortgages. And then people who really shouldn't have had a mortgage based on standard credit worthiness indices defaulted. But then it was all sort of seen as, oh well, this was because of predatory lending. So they lowered the standards. The lenders gave out money based on the new standards, and then when the people defaulted, it was the fault of the lenders. So this is a new version of that. It just seems like so perverse.
Right.
And it's almost like an example where it's like, we're going to do something that's so blatantly unfair, and you're going to swallow it. And they say it's because of race. They say, well, because minority borrowers have worse credit scores.
Right.
So, I mean, I don't understand how this could possibly be legal. I mean, doesn't it disparately impact?
Oh, Seth, you sweet summer child. Yes, but I mean, no, I mean, this is the thing, is that I do this all the time too. I'm like, how can they do this? But I think the thing you said earlier is right. It's like they do it because it's offensive. Like, there's a lot of that going around. And the other thing about this, which you just laid out really nicely, is like, there is this ecstatic kind of totemization level of sort of crazy idea that having a house is what will fix all problems of anybody who is even remotely disadvantaged. That like, just giving somebody a house is going to transform him from a coked out junkie on the street into a responsible, upstanding citizen with like a wife and two children. Like, that we need to, build. The problem of homelessness is that we don't have enough homes for people to live in. The problem, it's a housing problem. And then the problem with like, low credit scores is like, if we can just get them in the bottom floor, then they'll build up all this generational wealth. And it's like, look, I am as ready as the next person to speculate that the credit system is kind of fake and gay. Like, I have myself sort of watched like weird things affect my credit score, and we all know this is kind of a bad metric, and there probably are a bunch of people out there who like would do really well and responsibly with a home, but who don't have a good credit score for like a bunch of reasons that are kind of outside of their control. All of that stuff kind of seems plausible to me. But to flip that on its head and therefore say the only problem with anybody who has a low credit score or who is, otherwise disadvantaged is that they haven't had a home is like incredibly bananas. And it's the sort of thing you would only believe if you couldn't accept the idea that actually there are some people who either have debilitating problems, mental problems, like spiritual problems, whatever, or who simply aren't all that responsible and are like not doing very well with their money and like what they need like a sort of stiff kick in the pants or whatever. Like the whole kind of central conviction of leftist faith on social issues has been that the only reason people are poor, homeless, whatever, the only possible reason is like social injustice. And therefore, the natural consequence of that is, well, if we just take like a home out of the hands of somebody else, or we like take mortgage money from one guy and give it to another, then things will be fixed. And it's like it might be the case around the edges that there are people who are like unfairly not able to buy homes, but you're not going to fix that problem by just, making a bunch of houses. And I mean, this idea isn't just sort of philosophically bankrupt. It doesn't just fall apart under logical scrutiny. It's like it's been tried again and again and again, and it keeps not working. So yeah, I guess I do have to come back to your sort of conclusion. Like that's the point. Like it's just offensively brazen for the sake of it.
It seems like it. I mean, what happened before, 15, 20 years ago is they gave out mortgages. So more and more people were buying homes.
Right.
So the value of homes was going up and it became very easy to refinance. So, and they would encourage people to use the inflated value of their home as equity and to borrow money against it and to use the money to either fix up the house or go on vacation or do whatever. So it was just a bubble. And I mean, it makes sense that people would do that because they probably shouldn't have been owning homes to begin with. I'm not like somebody who's going to say that nobody should own. Whatever. I don't want to say that you shouldn't own a home, but clearly there have to be standards. I don't see what the big deal is with renting. And you know what? If they want to use rental, if you pay your rent on time, that should factor into your credit score. I think that's perfectly reasonable. Like, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, that's like
stuff like that.
That's the least unreasonable version of how things can affect your credit score. I mean, there's some things about like how many accounts you have associated with your credit. But there's some things that don't make a ton of sense to me. But at a baseline, right? Because we have to remember, we're not just talking about owning a home the way you would own like a mug or a book. Like we're talking about taking out a massive loan. Like I quote unquote own my home, but what that actually means is that a bank paid a bunch of money and now I'm gradually paying that bank back. So
Right.
like it's not actually just like, should or should you not have this thing, which is kind of a significant piece of property. It's like you're entering into a transaction that involves a bunch of credit and faith, which is why your credit score matters. I mean, this stuff is so, to me, kind of basic and obvious. Like you can be like a dumb guy when it comes to economics, as indeed I am, and still feel that there's a ton of illogic here and obviously ideologically motivated wish casting, just like fantasy land thinking based on, right, this idea that, I mean, again, you you don't have to be at the like lowest possible rung of society for it maybe not to be the best idea for you to own a home. Like the metric may be flawed, but there is actually something being measured, which is like, will it be responsible for you and for society generally if you and a bunch of people who are basically similar to you, like, are on the hook for a ton of money that you then have to pay to a bank that then might evaporate if you don't pay it. I don't know. It's all part of this whole thing where money just doesn't actually exist in the minds of sort of the people that seem to run our systems. Is like it's all just sort of numbers and funny money, whatever. It doesn't it doesn't really matter to them. And which is a nice little segue actually into the latest philosophical reflection from a woman who I think really at this point is sort of our unofficial philosopher laureate, you might say, our
Yes.
metaphysician in chief. And she has some thoughts about what you might call Dasein, that is being in time, being and
Hmm.
time. And we're just going to play the clip here for a second, and then we
Please.
can reflect to pull us out.
So I think it's very important, as you have heard from so many incredible leaders, for us at every moment in time, and certainly this one, to see the moment in time in which we exist and are present, and to be able to contextualize it, to understand where we exist in the history and in the moment as it relates not only to the past but the future.
Okay, so Seth, I'll just hand it off to you. What Whitehead said that all philosophy is just footnotes to Plato and Aristotle. What are your footnotes to Harris on this profound topic?
Well, I just think it's interesting how she says the same thing over and over again in this kind of like Heraclitan stream of consciousness. And it always sounds roughly the same, but it's never quite the same. I think it's very important for us at every moment in time, and certainly this one, to see the moment in time in which we exist and are present, and to be able to contextualize it, as it relates not only to the past, but the future.
Sort of Heraclitean fugue state, if you like.
Yeah, kind of, a little bit, just sort of wander like or like a non-playing character trying to walk through a wall.
Oh man, where they just keep like up a second.
Yeah. Here's the thing I don't understand.
Yeah.
Because I remember before, when Kamala Harris was in the Senate and she was on the Judiciary Committee, I think, and I watched her ask questions and I was impressed. I was like, wow, this woman is like really sharp. She seemed to be comprehending what was happening. She knew how to ask questions. She knew how to listen and to respond to, I think maybe during the Kavanaugh hearings. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I remember thinking, oh, she's formidable. Now something's happened and I don't know what it is, but she just sounds like a total basket case. I can't figure out for the life of me what she even thinks she's saying. It's this crazy word salad.
That's
right.
Very interesting. Yeah. Well, one take on that would be that Harris is so canny and so attuned to what's required of her politically in any given situation that she has sort of adopted this vacuous hope and change plus like social justice persona, and that this is really kind of foreign to her because what she actually is like a tough angry San Francisco DA or whatever, and that what she really likes doing is like locking people up for like marijuana charges, and she's had to take on this attitude of like, yes girl, like I am, because in fact like the only role that has been successful for her at a national stage, like, or I guess federally as a presidential candidate, the only role that has been successful for her is as diversity hire, right? Her entire credential for the role that she's currently in is to be the like black woman to Biden's doddering old white man. And as a result, perhaps she feels like that's the role that she's supposed to be playing to garner attention and affection. And hence the fake laugh, hence the like, oh my gosh, look at my bus. She may be playing a ditz to a certain extent here.
I've heard that, and if that's what she's doing, like
Oscar,
more, it's Oscar worthy. And I tremble at the thought of what's to come for America, because if she's really like, who knows what's behind that? If this is all like an act, and she's not actually like a tipsy person falling off a bar stool, which is what she always seems like these days, then God bless her, but she's a genius.
Oh yeah. Well, behind it is
if that's true. If that's all true.
Yeah, you're right. It's very speculative, but what's behind it is the Terminator face. I mean, somebody that can, enter into that level of just empty sort of vapidity is obviously like some sort of sociopath. Okay, now I'm gonna get sued for defaming Kamala Harris now, but I just think it's very important that we contextualize the decontextualization of being here now as we are. It's like praise song for the day, girl. That's really all. Okay, let us turn now to some words that have meaning. And that is to encourage you to read the damn site. AmericanMind.org is the website that this podcast is associated with. If somehow you have found us without previously having found the American Mind, welcome. This is not what we do all day. This is what we do for fun on Wednesdays. And then the rest of the time, we are publishing stuff that you would like to read at AmericanMind.org. And every week each of us picks a piece that we thought was particularly worth your attention. This time around, so we have been, just because it's so important to contextualize, to put things in context, especially in this moment right now, to contextualize. Let me contextualize for you my recommendation this week by saying I am the features editor, which means that I am in charge of putting together sort of groups of pieces. And one group of pieces that we have been putting together is about philanthropy, and specifically about philanthropy sort of organizations drifting left when they were ostensibly designed to support either conservative right-wing causes or just sort of centrist, even libertarian causes. The main piece is called New Koch, however you pronounce that. Koch. Thank you, New Koch. A few responses rolling out. And it's, in some ways, this is kind of a variation on the old theme of if any organization is not explicitly right-wing, it will eventually drift left. Although in this case, it's even stronger in that, things that are ostensibly, that claim to be right-wing can be captured from within. And the stakes are very high because you have large donations directed at organizations which claim to be supporting certain causes. And then, your money might go to a place you would rather it not go. Within this feature, we have a piece called Should Entrepreneurship Be Social? It's by Howard, and here's another name you can help me to pronounce. Seth Husock? Howard Husock, who Seth put me in touch with. And I like this piece for a lot of reasons. One, that it's very measured. It's not breathless or it's not a harangue. But it's also kind of devastating because it shows how a seemingly harmless, but also kind of vacuous piece of jargon, like the corporate speak, in this case, the phrase social entrepreneur, by virtue of its very semantic hollowness, simply by not really having a clear definition, can become a Trojan horse for leftist agitation and radicalism. And so the term he's examining, as I said, is social entrepreneur, but I think his analysis could very easily be applied to words like diversity, equity, things that sort of sound vaguely nice on the outside, but always come with a hidden leftist agenda that the people who sign on would not like if it were spelled out in plain terms. It's the sort of thing that, like, if you can get a bunch of nice sort of centrists or even, slightly right of center people to be like, yeah, well, we should have more diversity. That we're in favor of diversity. You mean ideological diversity, right? And by the time that second half of the sentence is out of your mouth, it's already like, no, actually, we mean like favoring certain races and disfavoring others exclusively at all times. And so anyway, the piece is called Should Entrepreneurship Be Social? And I think it's a really smart and carefully, tightly reasoned examination of a specific case with applications far outside the remit just of philanthropy. Seth, what is your piece?
Let me just say that, yes, I agree with you on both of those other pieces. And Howard Husock is a really smart guy, expert on housing, and always writes very, very interesting stuff. The piece I like this week is by our own Peachy Keenan. It's called Revolution of Color. And she puts forward a kind of an interesting, I don't know if it's like a hypothesis or just kind of an interesting description, a way of looking at the way the left is trying to affect change across America. And she compares it to the intelligence community's actions in, Eastern Europe and other places, basically the color revolution, where NGOs, local NGOs operating essentially under the aegis of, the CIA or the Open Society, foment discord and gin up, astroturf revolutions, which are then given, like the Orange Revolution, the Pink Revolution. I mean, they had one in Ukraine in 2014. So she basically compares that to what the left does state by state in America. And so we're seeing like little color revolutions all around the country, like, regarding, right now it's trans, but other things too. It's a good piece. It's very clever, and I guess Steve Bannon liked it a lot, and amplified it on his show. So, Revolution of Color by Peachy Keenan. It's a great piece.
It's a great piece. And did she give it that title, or did we? I can't remember. I love it.
She did.
Yeah, gotta tip my hat for that one. I really like that. Always worth reading Peachy, but this one is very good and pertains in part, I'm afraid, to my own newly adopted home state, Tennessee. The one thing that I'm going to add to our Kamala conversation based on this piece is that, and only loosely based on this piece, but I have also noticed that there is now a two-tiered system of leftist rhetoric, one of which involves very talented speakers, such as, for instance, Justin Pearson, kind of LARPing in a certain mode of like civil rights gravitas. And that mode involves a lot of very serious pauses. And then you go into the fester, but then you stop. And Pearson's for everything else you may say about it, he's very good at imitating this. The other guy, the other Justin Jones, if you watch him speak, he also does this, but he's plainly using the pauses just to try to think about what he is going to say, because he's not a very eloquent person.
Right.
Sometimes with Kamala, I wonder whether she's in that second tier of leftist rhetoric, where it's like, we need to always really go for just trying to think about the words that are going to come into her mouth next. But just a thought, throwing that out there. Do with it what you will. That's it for us this week. Thank you very much for listening. As always, we love to hear from you. This has been another episode of the Roundtable Klavan and Barron edition. And if you like this show, you will like all of the websites that I'm about to mention to you. One of them you've already heard of, and that's AmericanMind.org, where you will get the pieces we've just talked about and a whole range of others throughout the week. You will also love ClaremontReviewOfBooks.com, where you will find the CRB, our sister publication, our older sister publication, reviews of books, long essays on the intellectual state of the right and American politics generally. You can donate to support our work at Claremont.org/donate. That's how we keep the lights on, and we very much appreciate it. Those that wish to can be shouted out and celebrated by name, but if you don't want to be celebrated by name, that's also just fine. We appreciate pseudonymous donations as well. Our DC-based Center for the American Way of Life is at dc.claremont.org, and you can support this show, The Roundtable, by finding us on any feed where you get podcasts, wherever you're listening to us right now. Give us 5 stars, follow, subscribe if you haven't already, and share, let people know. That's how we grow the show. 5 stars really, really helps. And the next best thing is, if you have any criticisms, keep them to yourself. Thanks, as always, to our production and engineering crew, Jake Gannon and Blaze Ebener. And thanks to you all for listening. We will talk to you next week.